Liam Carter was 13 years old when he learned that sometimes the people who are supposed to keep you safe are just counting down the days until they can let you go. The cabin, weathered, sagging, with a thatched roof half collapsed under snow, had never been a home. Not in any way that mattered. It was a structure on the edge of a forgotten town, surrounded by pine trees that seemed to lean away from it, as if even nature knew better than to get too close. For 8 months, it had been Liam's shelter. Not his sanctuary, not his family, just a place where he slept and stayed quiet and tried not to take up too much space. That October evening, the air inside smelled like old wood and kerosene and something sour that never quite left the corners. The small wood stove crackled weakly, barely pushing warmth into the single room. Outside, the first real snow of the season dusted the ground in uneven patches, clinging to dead grass and the splintered steps that led to the crooked door. Liam stood near the window, his canvas backpack already on his shoulder, worn straps digging into his too thin frame. His knuckles were white where they gripped the strap. He was smaller than most boys his age, always had been, but he stood with a kind of stubborn stillness, like he was used to being overlooked and had learned not to flinch. His uncle didn't raise his voice. That made it worse somehow. "You're old enough now," the man said, arms folded across a flannel shirt that smelled like cigarettes and diesel. He didn't meet Liam's eyes, just stared at the floor, at the door, at anything else. "We've done what we could." Liam's throat tightened. He'd rehearsed this moment a dozen times in his head. He'd planned what to say, promises to be quieter, to eat less, to disappear into the background even more than he already did. But now that the words were needed, they wouldn't come. "I can stay in the shed," Liam said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I won't bother anyone. It's not up for discussion." His aunt's voice cut through, flat and final. She stood by the stove, not looking at him either. "You'll be fine. Kids figured out. Kids figured out." The words hung in the air like smoke. Heavy. Permanent. 10 minutes later, Liam was outside. If you're hooked, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss what happens next. Drop a comment if you've ever felt like you didn't belong. And if this story is hitting you in the chest, hit that like button. Let's keep going. The door closed behind him with a soft thud. No slam, no drama, just a quiet, deliberate sound, followed by the metallic click of the locks sliding into place. The porch light, a single bare bulb swaying slightly in the wind, went dark. Final. Absolute. Liam stood there for a moment on the half-rotted steps, his breath curling in the cold air like something fragile and already fading. The faded denim jacket he wore was too thin for winter. It had been his father's once, back when his father was still alive, back when the word father still meant something. Now it was just cloth, just memory stitched into seams that were coming apart. His scuffed brown boots were packed with old snow from the walk home earlier. He could feel the cold seeping through the worn leather, numbing his toes. The knit cap pulled low over his eyes did little to keep the wind out, but he tugged it down anyway, more out of habit than hope. The October night pressed in around him. Sharp, unforgiving. Frost clung to the dead grass in silvery patches, and the wind scraped through the skeletal pines that ringed the clearing. Somewhere in the distance, a branch cracked under the weight of ice. The sound echoed, then disappeared into silence. Liam didn't look back at the cabin. There was nothing to see, nothing to hope for. He adjusted the strap of his canvas backpack and started walking. At first, he didn't know where he was going. He just followed the dirt road that cut through the trees, the same road he'd walked 100 times before. But this time, he wasn't coming back. The town was small enough that everyone knew everyone, but not small enough that anyone really cared. As he walked past a handful of houses scattered along the road, he could see warm light glowing behind curtains. Shadows moved inside. A family sitting down to dinner. A kid laughing at something. A mother calling someone to come wash their hands. Each window felt like a small, private world, and Liam wasn't part of any of them. He kept his head down and kept walking. By the time he reached the edge of town, his legs ached and his chest felt hollow, like something important had been carved out and left behind in that cabin. He stopped near the old feed store, long since closed, the windows boarded up, and let his backpack slide off his shoulder. He sat on the frozen ground, back against the weathered wall, and unzipped the bag. Inside, 3 shirts, all too big. 1 spare pair of jeans, stiff with cold. A toothbrush. A folded photograph of his parents that he never let anyone see. And 5 crumpled dollar bills, wrapped in a rubber band. $5. Liam stared at the money for a long time. Then he folded the bag closed, pulled his knees to his chest, and tried to figure out what old enough was supposed to mean. The stars were coming out now, hard and distant in the blackening sky. He didn't cry. He just kept breathing and waited for morning. Morning came slow and gray, the kind of dawn that doesn't announce itself so much as leak into the sky like dirty water. Liam hadn't slept. Not really. He'd sat with his back against the feed store wall all night, knees pulled to his chest, watching his breath fog and fade in the freezing air. His body ached in places he didn't know could ache. His fingers were stiff. His feet were numb inside his boots. But he was still breathing. Still here. That had to count for something. As the first pale light touched the rooftops, Liam stood, hoisted his backpack onto his shoulder, and started walking again. There was no plan, no destination, just movement because stopping felt too much like giving up. The town was waking up around him. A truck rumbled past, exhaust trailing white in the cold. A dog barked from behind a chain-link fence. Somewhere, a screen door slammed. Normal sounds. Morning sounds. Sounds that belonged to people who had somewhere to be. Liam kept walking. By the time he reached the far edge of town, the snow had thickened. What had been sparse patches near the cabin was now a solid blanket, covering the ground in uneven drifts. The sidewalk disappeared. Pine trees began to replace houses, their branches heavy with frost, leaning over the road like silent watchers. His stomach growled. Sharp. Insistent. He'd eaten nothing since yesterday afternoon. A stale sandwich his aunt had left on the counter without a word. He pressed a hand to his stomach and kept moving. That's when he saw it. The courthouse sat at the end of a narrow street. A squat brick building with a flagpole out front and a bulletin board nailed to the wall near the door. Papers fluttered in the wind, corners curling, some half-ripped and forgotten. Liam slowed. One notice caught his eye. It was crooked, pinned carelessly with a single rusted tack, flapping like it was trying to escape. He stepped closer. Abandoned property. Minimum bid. $5. He read it once. Then again. Then a third time, just to make sure the words didn't change. $5. His hand went instinctively to his pocket, where the rubber-banded bills sat folded against his leg. 5 crumpled dollars. All he had. All that stood between him and absolute nothing. His stomach growled again, louder this time. He could buy food. A meal. Maybe 2 if he stretched it. Something warm. Something that would stop the gnawing ache in his gut and give him the energy to figure out what came next. That's what made sense. But something else pulled at him. Something quieter. Deeper. He read the notice again, this time focusing on the address scrawled at the bottom in faded ink. Old Mill Road. End of the clearing. If you're wondering what Liam's about to do, hit that subscribe button right now so you don't miss a single moment. Drop a comment and tell me, would you spend your last $5 on food or take the risk? And if you're feeling this story, smash that like button. Let's go. Liam pulled the notice off the board, folded it carefully, and slipped it into his jacket pocket. Then he started walking again. Old Mill Road wasn't hard to find. It wasn't really a road anymore. Just a dirt path half buried under snow, cutting through a stretch of pine trees that seemed to lean inward, closing off the sky. His boots crunched through the frozen crust with each step, breaking through to the softer snow beneath. The clearing appeared slowly, like something reluctant to be found. And there it was. The structure stood alone in the center of the white expanse, half swallowed by the wilderness around it. It was small, barely more than a single room, and looked like it had been forgotten by everyone, including time itself. The wooden planks were gray and split, warped from years of rain and snow and neglect. The roof sagged in the middle, buried under a thick layer of yellowed straw and melting snow that dripped steadily from the eaves. 2 windows stared out like hollow eyes, the glass long gone, leaving only jagged edges and darkness behind. Dead vines crawled up one side of the structure, brittle and brown, clinging to the wood like they were the only thing holding it together. It looked fragile, forgotten. It looked exactly how Liam felt, but it was still standing. He stepped closer, his boots sinking into the snow. The air here was colder, sharper, like the clearing had its own private winter. He reached out and touched the wall. The wood was rough under his palm, splintered and soft in places where rot had set in. One strong wind could probably bring it down, but it hadn't. Not yet. Liam stood there for a long time, staring at the broken windows, the sagging roof, the vines that refused to let go. He thought about the $5 in his pocket. He thought about hunger. He thought about pride. And he thought about what it meant to have something. Anything that was his. Not borrowed. Not temporary. Not something someone could take away the moment he became inconvenient. His. He turned and walked back toward town. The courthouse was quiet when he stepped inside. The air smelled like old paper and floor wax. A woman sat behind a desk near the back, barely looking up as Liam approached. "The property on Old Mill Road," he said quietly. "I want a bid." She glanced at him, then at the clock, then back at him with the kind of tired indifference that comes from years of shuffling paperwork. "Minimum's $5, she said. "You got it." Liam pulled the rubber band off the bills, smoothed them out on the counter, and slid them across. The woman counted them once, stamped a form, and slid a receipt back toward him. "No one else bid," she said. "It's yours." No ceremony. No congratulations. Just a piece of paper and a stamp. Liam folded the receipt, slipped it into his pocket next to the notice, and walked out. By noon, Liam Carter, 13 years old, homeless, and alone, owned a collapsing house on the coldest edge of town. It wasn't much, but it was more than he'd had that morning. And for now, that was enough. The walk back to the clearing felt longer than it had the first time. Maybe it was the weight of what he'd just done. Maybe it was the hunger gnawing at his insides, reminding him with every step that he'd chosen walls over food. Or maybe it was just the cold, seeping deeper into his bones with each gust of wind that cut through the trees. Liam didn't let himself think too hard about it. He just kept moving, the receipt folded in his pocket like some kind of fragile proof that he existed, that he mattered, that something in this world, even something broken, belonged to him. When the clearing came into view again, the house looked smaller than before, more vulnerable, like it knew he was coming back and wasn't sure how to feel about it. He stopped at the edge of the tree line and stared. From here, he could see every flaw, the way the walls leaned slightly to one side, the gaps between the planks where daylight bled through, the door hanging crooked on rusted hinges, one corner dragging in the snow. It looked like it was barely holding on. Liam knew the feeling. He crossed the clearing, his boots breaking through the crust of snow with each step, and pushed the door open. The hinges screamed. The inside was worse than the outside. Much worse. The single room was dim, even with the broken windows letting in pale afternoon light. The floorboards were uneven and split, some of them missing entirely, leaving dark gaps that dropped down into nothing. When Liam stepped inside, the wood creaked so loudly beneath his weight that he froze, half expecting the whole structure to collapse under him. It didn't, but it felt close. The walls were bare wood, warped and stained with years of water damage. Cracks ran between the planks like veins, wide enough that he could see straight through to the outside in places. Wind whistled through them, a low, mournful sound that filled the room like a breath that wouldn't stop. Snow had blown in through the shattered windows, piling in small drifts along the edges of the floor. The air inside was somehow colder than the air outside, like the house was holding on to winter and refusing to let go. There was no furniture, no stove, no sign that anyone had lived here in years, maybe decades. Just four walls, a sagging roof, and the smell of rot and wetwood. Liam stood in the center of the room, his breath fogging in front of him, and felt the weight of his decision settle over his shoulders like a stone. This was it. This was what $5 bought. If you're still with Liam, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You're not going to want to miss what happens next. Drop a comment and tell me, could you survive a night in a place like this? And if this story is pulling you in, smash that like button. Let's keep going. He didn't have a choice. The sun was already sinking lower, the light outside turning pale and thin. In another hour, maybe two, it would be dark, and the temperature would drop even further. Liam moved to the back corner of the room, the spot farthest from the broken windows and closest to what was left of the back wall. He kicked away the snow that had gathered there, brushed off the floor with his hand, and tested the boards with his weight. They groaned but held. Good enough. He slid his backpack off his shoulder and set it down carefully, then pulled out the extra shirts and the spare pair of jeans. He put on all of it, layering everything he owned until he looked bulkier than he was, until the fabric pressed against his skin and trapped what little warmth his body still had. It wasn't enough. It wouldn't be enough. But it was all he had. He sat down with his back against the wall, pulled his knees to his chest, and wrapped his arms around them. The backpack became his pillow, thin, uncomfortable, but better than nothing. The wind picked up outside, rattling the walls and sending fresh snow swirling through the windows. The roof groaned above him, a deep, ominous sound like the whole structure was about to give up. Liam closed his eyes and tried to sleep. He couldn't. The cold was too sharp, too insistent. It pressed against him from every direction, seeping through the layers of clothing, through the denim jacket, through his skin. His teeth chattered. His fingers ached. His feet had gone numb hours ago. Every gust of wind made the house shudder. Every creak of the floorboards made him wonder if the whole thing was about to come down on top of him. At some point, he didn't know what time, only that it was fully dark now. He opened his eyes and stared at the ceiling. The roof was a patchwork of broken beams and rotted straw, gaps wide enough that he could see stars through them. Cold, distant, indifferent. He thought about leaving, just standing up, grabbing his bag and walking back to town. Maybe he could find a church with an unlocked door. Maybe someone would let him sleep in a garage or a barn or anywhere that wasn't this frozen shell of a building. But then what? He'd still be homeless, still unwanted, still at the mercy of people who'd already decided he wasn't worth keeping. At least here, he didn't have to ask permission. At least here, the door was his to close, even if it barely stayed on its hinges. The cold became his first teacher that night. It taught him that survival wasn't about comfort. It was about endurance, about lasting one more hour, one more breath, one more heartbeat. It taught him that the difference between giving up and holding on was sometimes nothing more than stubbornness. And it taught him that if he stayed here, if he really stayed, he would have to fight for every single night. By the time the first pale light of dawn crept through the broken windows, Liam hadn't slept more than an hour. His body ached. His hands were stiff. His breath came out in shaky clouds. But he was still here, still breathing, still alive. He sat up slowly, every muscle protesting, and looked around the room. The snow, the cracks, the sagging roof, the floor that threatened to give out with every step. It was a disaster, but it was his disaster. And somewhere in the cold, exhausted fog of his mind, a decision took shape. If he couldn't leave, he would rebuild. One board at a time, one nail at a time, one breath at a time. He didn't know how, but he'd figure it out. He had to. The second morning came with a silence that felt heavier than the cold. Liam woke stiff and sore, his body protesting every movement as he pushed himself upright. His breath still clouded in front of him. The walls still leaked wind. The floors still groaned beneath his weight. But he was awake, and that meant he had work to do. He stood slowly, brushing snow off his jacket, and began to move through the room with purpose. If he was going to survive here, if this place was going to be anything more than a tomb made of wood and snow, he needed to make it livable. He started by looking for tools. There wasn't much. Just debris, broken planks, piles of rotted straw, rusted metal scattered in corners like forgotten bones. But then, near the back wall, half buried under a heap of splintered wood, he found it. A hammer. The handle was cracked and weathered, the grip worn smooth from years of use. The head was rusted, pitted with age, but when he picked it up and tested the weight, it felt solid enough. It would work. He kept searching. Scattered across the floor, mixed in with dirt and debris, were bent nails. Dozens of them. Some were too warped to use, twisted beyond recognition. But others, enough others, could be straightened, could be hammered back into something useful. Liam gathered them carefully, one by one, and dropped them into his jacket pocket. Then he stepped outside. The porch steps had collapsed long ago, leaving only a jagged frame of wood half buried in snow. Liam crouched beside it and began pulling boards free, testing each one for rot. Some crumbled in his hands, too far gone to salvage. But others, warped, splintered, but still solid at the core, could be reused. He stacked them near the door, planning each piece like a puzzle he didn't yet know how to solve. His hands were already cold, already aching, but he kept working. The first repair he attempted was small. Simple. One of the gaps in the wall near the back corner was wide enough to fit his fist through. Wind poured in constantly, turning the inside of the house into a wind tunnel that made warmth impossible. Liam pulled one of the shirts from his backpack, one he'd worn yesterday, already damp with sweat and cold, and tore it into strips. He stuffed the fabric into the gap, packing it tight, forcing it deep into the crack until the wind stopped whistling through. It wasn't perfect, but it helped. He moved to the next gap, then the next, using fabric, bits of straw, anything he could find to block the relentless cold from pouring through the walls. His fingers cramped. His knuckles split from the cold. He didn't stop. If you're rooting for Liam, hit that subscribe button right now. This is just the beginning. Drop a comment and tell me, what's the hardest thing you've ever had to fix on your own? And if you're feeling this journey, smash that like button. Let's keep building. By midday, Liam turned his attention to the roof. It sagged dangerously in the center, weighed down by layers of wet straw and compacted snow. If it gave out completely, the whole structure would be exposed. Unlivable. He climbed carefully onto what was left of the porch frame, testing each foothold before putting his full weight down. The wood groaned beneath him, but it held. From there, he pulled himself onto the edge of the roof. The straw was slick and unstable, shifting under his boots. He moved slowly, distributing his weight, every muscle tense with the fear that one wrong step would send him crashing through. He reached the center and began redistributing the straw, pushing the heaviest clumps toward the edges, evening out the load. Snow tumbled down in wet clumps, splashing into the drifts below. Then it happened. One of the support beams beneath the roof shifted. Not much, just a few inches, but it was enough. The roof lurched sideways, and Liam lost his balance. His boots slipped. He threw his arms out, grabbing blindly, and caught the edge of a crossbeam just as his body started to slide. His heart hammered in his chest. For a moment, he just hung there, breathing hard, staring down at the snow below. Then he pulled himself back up, slowly, carefully, and kept working. The town watched. He didn't see them at first, but over the next few days, he noticed. People driving past on the road that ran near the clearing, slowing down just enough to get a look. A man standing at the edge of the trees one morning, arms crossed, shaking his head before walking away. A group of kids his age laughing as they passed, pointing at the crooked house and a boy trying to fix it. Some of the looks were curious. Most were dismissive. A few were cruel. But Liam didn't stop. He couldn't afford to care what they thought. Each repair taught him something. A board that looked solid would split under pressure the moment he tried to nail it down. A wall that seemed stable would shift when he leaned against it. He learned to test everything twice, to move carefully, to respect the fragility of what he was working with. His hands blistered. The skin on his palms cracked and bled. His boots soaked through from kneeling in the snow, and his feet went numb for hours at a time. But the house got sturdier, and so did he. By the end of the week, Liam had patched most of the major gaps in the walls. The roof no longer sagged as dangerously. The door, while still crooked, now closed tightly enough to keep out most of the wind. And then he built the fire pit. He gathered stones from the clearing, heavy and cold, and arranged them in a circle in the center of the room, reinforcing the base with smaller rocks packed tight. He cleared the area around it, making sure no loose straw or rotted wood was close enough to catch. Then, using scraps of dry wood he'd scavenged and a book of matches he'd found in the debris, he struck a flame. It took 3 tries, but the fire caught. Small at first, hesitant, then stronger. The warmth spread slowly, filling the corners of the room, chasing away the cold that had lived there for so long. Liam sat beside the fire, His hand stretched toward the flames and felt something shift inside him. For the first time since the door had closed behind him, he felt something other than cold. That night, a faint glow shone from the broken window of the cabin. Thin, fragile, but there, and anyone passing by could see it. A boy, a fire, a house that refused to fall. Winter didn't arrive gradually. It came all at once like a door slamming shut. One day, the snow was falling in light, scattered flurries. The next, it was a wall of white that didn't stop. The wind howled through the clearing, bending the pine trees and piling snow into drifts that buried everything in sight. Liam had thought he understood cold. He'd been wrong. This was different. This was relentless. The kind of cold that found every crack, every gap, every weakness, and exploited it without mercy. The kind of cold that made you wonder if spring was a lie people told themselves just to keep going. He spent his days reinforcing what he could, stuffing more fabric into the walls, keeping the fire burning, rationing the scraps of wood he'd gathered before the snow got too deep. The roof held, barely. He could hear it groaning at night under the weight of the snow, could see the way the center sagged, just a little more each day, the straw compressing, the beams bending under pressure they were never meant to carry. He told himself it would hold. He had to believe it would hold. It was evening when it happened. Liam was sitting near the fire, his hands stretched toward the flames, trying to coax feeling back into his fingers. The wind outside was screaming, battering the walls, shaking the entire structure like it was trying to tear it apart. And then, crack! The sound was massive, explosive, like a tree splitting in half. Liam's head snapped up just in time to see the ceiling buckle. A section of the roof, maybe a quarter of it, gave way all at once. The beams splintered. The straw collapsed inward in a wet, heavy mass. Wood and debris rained down, crashing onto the floor in a chaos of noise and destruction. Liam threw himself sideways, rolling toward the wall as a support beam slammed down exactly where he'd been sitting a second before. Splinters scattered across the floor like shrapnel. Dust and snow filled the air. And then, silence. Liam lay on his side, breathing hard, his heart hammering so loud he could hear it in his ears. His hands were shaking. His whole body was shaking. He stared at the beam that had nearly crushed him. 6 inches to the left, and he wouldn't have made it. If your heart is racing right now, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what happens next. Drop a comment and tell me, have you ever had a moment where everything almost fell apart? And if you're still here with Liam, smash that like button. Let's keep going. Liam pushed himself up slowly, his legs unsteady beneath him. He looked around the room. The damage was bad. A huge section of the ceiling was just gone, opened up to the night sky. Snow was already falling through the gap, swirling in the firelight, melting into puddles on the floor. The beam that had collapsed was split down the middle, the wood soft and rotten where it had finally given out. Other beams nearby looked just as weak, sagging under the same weight, threatening to follow. The fire still burned, somehow. The flames flickered in the draft, casting wild shadows across the wreckage. Liam stood in the center of the room, surrounded by debris, and felt the weight of it all pressed down on him. This was it. This was the moment. He could leave, pack his bag, walk back to town, find a church, a shelter, anywhere that wasn't this broken, collapsing death trap. No one would blame him. No one expected him to survive this anyway. He stepped outside. The cold hit him like a fist. The wind tore at his jacket, bit at his face, stung his eyes until they watered. Snow had piled up against the walls of the cabin, burying the lower half of the structure in white. Liam walked a few steps into the clearing and stopped. He turned and looked back at the house, at the hole in the roof, at the crooked walls, at the faint glow of the fire still burning inside. He sat down in the snow. His breath came out in ragged clouds. His hands were still shaking. His whole body felt like it was vibrating with adrenaline and exhaustion and something close to fear. He'd almost died, and the house, this thing he'd been pouring everything into, had almost killed him. For a long time, he just sat there, staring, thinking. Then he stood up. He didn't say anything, didn't make a decision out loud. He just walked back inside, grabbed the fallen beam, and dragged it out of the way. The next morning, Liam went looking for lumber. The snow was deep, up to his knees in places, but he pushed through it, following the tree line, searching for anything he could use. He found fallen branches first, too thin, too weak. Then, deeper in the woods, he found a tree that had come down in a storm, probably years ago. The trunk was thick, solid, not yet rotted through. It would take work to move it, to cut it, to shape it, but it would work. He spent the entire day dragging sections of the tree back to the clearing, one piece at a time. His shoulders burned. His legs screamed. His hands bled through the blisters that had barely started to heal. He didn't stop. By the third day, he'd hauled enough lumber to rebuild. He studied the weak beam that had collapsed, traced the fracture lines with his fingers, figured out where the stress points were. Where it had failed, he wasn't going to make the same mistake twice. He cut the new lumber to length using a rusted saw he'd found buried in the debris. The cuts were rough, uneven, but they held. He positioned the first beam carefully, bracing it against the existing structure, then hammered it into place with bent nails he'd straightened by hand. It didn't fit perfectly, but it held. He added a second beam, then a third. He created makeshift braces using smaller pieces of wood, angling them to distribute the weight, reinforcing the joints where the old structure had been weakest. He doubled the support, tripled it in places. The roof didn't just need to survive. It needed to be stronger than before. It took a week. His hands were destroyed. His body ached in ways he didn't know were possible. He slept less, ate less, pushed harder. But piece by piece, the roof came back together. Stronger, sturdier, better. He redistributed the straw more carefully this time, layering it evenly, packing it tight to keep out the wind, but light enough that it wouldn't overwhelm the beams. And when he was done, he stood in the center of the room and looked up. The ceiling held. No groaning. No sagging. Solid. The house didn't just survive. It improved. And so did Liam. He was thinner now. Harder. His hands were scarred and calloused. His face was wind-burned and lined with exhaustion. But his eyes were different. Steadier. He'd looked at collapse and decided to rebuild. He'd looked at failure and chosen to learn. The house had fought back, and he'd fought harder. That night, the fire burned bright. The walls held. The roof held. And Liam Carter, 13 years old, alone and still standing, closed his eyes and slept. Not because he felt safe, but because he'd earned it. The sky had been warning them for days. A heavy, bruised gray that pressed down on the world like something solid. The wind had changed direction, coming now from the north with a bite that cut through layers of clothing and found skin no matter how carefully you wrapped yourself. The animals knew. The birds had disappeared. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. And then the blizzard came. It didn't start with snow. It started with silence, a deep, unnatural quiet that made the air feel thick and wrong. Then the wind arrived, howling across the clearing like something alive and angry, bending the pine trees until their branches scraped the ground. And then the snow, not falling, driving, horizontal sheets of white that erased the world in minutes. The clearing disappeared. The tree line vanished. Everything beyond the walls of the cabin became a wall of white noise and cold. Liam had prepared for this. For weeks, he'd been sealing cracks, stuffing gaps, reinforcing weak points in the walls. He'd gathered every scrap of burnable wood he could find and stacked it inside, away from the snow. He'd checked the roof supports twice, then a third time, making sure they could handle the weight of what was coming. Now, as the storm raged outside, he sat near the fire and watched the flames dance. The walls held. The roof held. The fire burned steadily, fed carefully, kept alive with the discipline he'd learned through trial and frozen fingers and nights when giving up seemed easier than breathing. Outside, the wind screamed. Inside, Liam was warm. Not comfortable, not safe, but warm and alive. He made it this far. The knock came just after midnight. At first, Liam thought he'd imagined it. The wind was so loud, battering the walls with such force, that any other sound seemed impossible. But then it came again, louder, desperate. Thud, thud, thud. Someone was at the door. Liam's heart jumped. He stood quickly, his body tense, every instinct screaming caution. No one came out here. No one even knew he existed. The knocking came again, weaker this time. Frantic, he crossed the room in 3 steps and pulled the door open. The wind hit him like a fist, driving snow into his face, stealing his breath. He had to squint against it, holding the door with both hands to keep it from slamming back against the wall. And there, on the other side, were 3 people. A man, a woman, and a little girl. The man was holding the girl in his arms, her small body limp, her face pale and slack. The woman stood beside him, shaking so violently she could barely stay upright. Both of them looked like ghosts, snow-covered, frost-burned, eyes wide with exhaustion and fear. "Please," the man said, his voice cracking. "Please, our car, miles back, we saw your light." He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Liam stepped aside. "Get inside. If you're on the edge of your seat, hit that subscribe button right now. This is where everything changes. Drop a comment and tell me, would you open the door? And if this story is grabbing you, smash that like button. Let's go." The couple stumbled through the doorway, the man still clutching the girl, the woman collapsing against the wall the moment she was inside. Liam shoved the door, closed against the wind, and turned to face them. The girl wasn't moving. Her lips were blue. Her skin was pale, almost translucent. Her eyes were closed. Her breathing, so shallow Liam couldn't tell if she was breathing at all. "How long has she been like this?" Liam asked, his voice sharper than he intended. "I don't know," the man said, his voice shaking. "An hour? Maybe 2. We've been walking. We didn't know where we were. Put her by the fire. Now." The man didn't hesitate. He carried the girl to the fire and laid her down gently on the floor near the flames. The woman followed, kneeling beside her daughter, pulling off the girl's wet gloves with trembling hands. Liam moved quickly. He grabbed his spare shirts, the last clean clothes he had, and wrapped them around the girl's small body, layering them over her wet coat, trying to trap whatever warmth was left. Her skin was ice cold to the touch. "We need to warm her up slowly," Liam said, his mind racing through everything he'd learned about cold, about survival, about what happened when your body gave up fighting. Too fast, and it'll hurt her. He fed more wood into the fire, building it higher, hotter. Then he grabbed several fist-sized stones he'd been using to distribute heat around the room and placed them directly in the flames. The couple watched him, too exhausted to speak, too cold to do anything but shiver. Liam worked. He heated the stones until they were almost too hot to touch, then wrapped them carefully in strips of fabric and placed them near the girl's hands, her feet, her core. Not touching her skin directly, he knew better than that, but close enough to radiate warmth. He checked her breathing. Shallow, but there. He checked her pulse. Faint, but steady. She was still alive. Barely. "What's her name?" Liam asked quietly. "Emma," the woman whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Her name is Emma. She's going to be okay," Liam said, though he wasn't sure he believed it. "Just stay with her. Keep talking to her." The woman nodded, leaning close to her daughter, whispering things Liam couldn't hear. The man sat beside them, his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking. Liam didn't sleep. He couldn't. Every hour, he checked the fire, added wood, rotated the stones, made sure the heat stayed constant but not overwhelming. He gave the couple what little food he had, a few crackers, some dried fruit he'd been saving. They ate without speaking, too tired for words. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, the fire burned. And Liam kept watch. Just before dawn, when the wind had finally started to die down and the first pale light was beginning to creep through the cracks in the walls, Emma stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, and then she cried. Not a scream, not a wail, just a soft, confused cry. The sound of a child waking up in a strange place, scared and disoriented but alive. The woman gasped and pulled her daughter into her arms, sobbing, holding her so tight it looked like she'd never let go. The man buried his face in his hands and wept. And Liam, 13 years old, alone, and still learning what it meant to survive, sat back against the wall and closed his eyes. The sound of that cry carried louder than the storm ever had, louder than the wind, louder than the cold, louder than the voices that had told him he wasn't worth keeping. The house he had rebuilt, board by board, nail by nail, failure by failure, had become shelter. Not just for him, for them. The boy who had been abandoned had become a protector. And in that moment, sitting in a cabin that shouldn't have survived, surrounded by people who shouldn't have made it through the night, Liam Carter understood something he hadn't before. He wasn't just rebuilding a house. He was rebuilding himself. When the storm finally broke and the sun rose over the clearing, the world outside was transformed. Buried under feet of snow. Silent. Beautiful. The family stayed for 2 more days until the roads were cleared and help could reach them. Before they left, the man shook Liam's hand. The woman hugged him, tears in her eyes. And Emma, small, quiet Emma, looked up at him and whispered, "Thank you." Liam didn't know what to say, so he just nodded and watched them go. The cabin stood quiet again, empty again, but different now. The fire still burned. The walls still held. And Liam Carter, alone, but no longer abandoned, closed the door and got back to work. The storm broke on the 3rd day. The wind died first, fading from a roar to a whisper to nothing. Then the snow stopped falling, and the clouds pulled back like a curtain lifting, revealing a sky so blue and clear it almost hurt to look at. The world had been remade in white. Drifts buried the roads. Trees sagged under the weight of snow. The clearing around the cabin had become a blank canvas, pristine and untouched except for the narrow path Liam had carved from the door to his woodpile. And rising from the center of it all, thin and steady, was a column of smoke. Proof of life. Proof that something had survived. Word spread quickly in a small town. By the 2nd day after the storm, people started arriving. Not many at first. Just a few. The curious. The skeptical. People who'd heard the story third hand and wanted to see for themselves if it was true. A boy living alone in that old wreck on Old Mill Road, the one that should have collapsed years ago. He kept a family alive during the blizzard. They came on foot, trudging through the snow, standing at the edge of the clearing and staring. Liam saw them from the window. He didn't go out, didn't wave, just kept working the same way he'd been working for weeks. But they saw the reinforced beams running across the roof, visible now where sections of the straw had blown away. They saw the walls, no longer sagging, no longer split wide open. They saw the smoke rising steady and controlled from a chimney that hadn't existed a month ago. They saw a boy who had every reason to quit, and hadn't. The carpenter came first. His name was Mr. Brennan, a broad-shouldered man in his 50s with calloused hands and a face weathered by decades of hard work. He knocked on the door one morning, holding a toolbox. Liam opened it cautiously. "Heard what you did," Mr. Brennan said simply. "Figured you could use some real tools." He set the toolbox down on the step. Inside were things Liam had only dreamed of: a proper hammer, a handsaw with sharp teeth, a level, a square, nails that weren't bent or rusted. Liam stared at them. "I can't pay you," he said quietly. "Didn't ask you to." Mr. Brennan looked past him in the cabin, his eyes scanning the repairs, the makeshift braces, the uneven but functional work. "You did all this yourself?" Liam nodded. Mr. Brennan was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded back. "Keep at it, kid." And he left. If this is hitting you right in the chest, hit that subscribe button and don't miss what comes next. Drop a comment and tell me, has anyone ever believed in you when you didn't believe in yourself? And if you're with Liam all the way, smash that like button. Let's finish this. Others followed. The hardware store owner, a woman named Mrs. Chun, arrived 2 days later with bundles of insulation and boxes of new nails. She didn't make a big show of it, just unloaded them near the door and told Liam where to put them for maximum effect. A neighbor Liam had never met replaced the broken windows. He showed up one morning with panes of glass wrapped in blankets, installed them carefully, and refused to take anything in return. "Just wanted to help," the man said with a shrug. Liam didn't know what to say to any of them. He wasn't used to help, wasn't used to people seeing him as anything other than a problem to be solved or ignored. But he understood one thing clearly. This wasn't charity, not the way they were offering it. So Liam didn't ask for handouts. He asked for work. He went into town and knocked on doors. Asked if anyone needed fences repaired, snow cleared, firewood split, barn maintenance, anything. Some people turned him away, but some said yes. He worked for the carpenter, learning proper techniques, how to measure twice and cut once, how to read the grain of the wood. He worked for Mrs. Chun, stacking inventory, sweeping floors, earning credit toward materials he needed. He worked for the neighbor who'd fixed his windows, clearing snow from the man's driveway every morning before school kids started walking past. He didn't ask for money when he didn't need it. He asked for materials, for knowledge, for the things that would make the cabin stronger. And he earned every single improvement. The transformation didn't happen overnight. It took weeks, then months. But piece by piece, the cabin changed. The gray, weathered planks on the exterior were replaced with fresh wood, sealed against the weather. The roof was rebuilt properly, not with makeshift braces and hope, but with real beams, real support, real insulation underneath new layers of thatch that Mr. Brennan helped him install. The windows, once shattered and hollow, were now clear and strong, fitted with glass that didn't rattle in the wind. Inside, the floor was reinforced. The walls were insulated. The fire pit was replaced with a proper small stove that Mrs. Chun had found in her storage and used for years, but still functional. The cabin stopped being a shelter. It became a home. At night, when Liam lit the fire and the stove glowed warm, a golden light shone through the windows. Soft, steady, visible from the road. People started calling it the beacon, not to his face at first, just in passing, in conversation. You see the light at the beacon last night? Kid's still out there, still going. That place looks better than half the houses in town now. Because in the darkest storm, the one that had buried roads and stolen power and left families stranded in the cold, that light had stayed lit, and it had saved lives. Years later, when Liam was older, no longer a boy but a young man with broad shoulders and steady hands and a reputation for being someone you could count on, a journalist came to interview him. The story had grown beyond the town, beyond the county. The boy who survived alone, who rebuilt a house from nothing, who became a beacon. The journalist asked the question everyone wanted answered. How did you survive being kicked out at 13? Liam thought about it for a moment. He could have talked about the cold, about the nights when his fingers went numb and he couldn't feel his feet, about the hunger that hollowed him out from the inside. He could have talked about the fear, about the loneliness, about the nights when he lay awake wondering if anyone would even notice if he didn't make it through. But that's not what he said. He looked out the window of the cabin. The same cabin, but transformed now, unrecognizable from the wreck it had been. And he smiled faintly. It was still standing, he said quietly. So I figured I could too. The broken house became the strongest structure in that clearing. The walls that had barely held now stood firm against every storm. The roof that had collapsed was now reinforced, solid, built to last. And the boy who had been abandoned, cast out, told he was old enough to figure out on his own, became the one others relied on. When storms came, people checked on Liam. When someone needed help, they called on Liam. When a family got stranded or lost or found themselves in trouble, they looked for the light in the window. The beacon. It wasn't luck. It wasn't a miracle. It was resilience. Layered one repair at a time. One nail, one board, one frozen morning, one choice to keep going when quitting would have been easier. It was the decision to stand when the world expected him to fall, to build when everything around him was breaking, to become the light when everything else went dark. And in the end, that made all the difference. The cabin still stands today, stronger than ever, and so does Liam Carter. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button. There are more stories like this coming. Drop a comment and tell me what this story meant to you. And if you made it all the way to the end, smash that like button. Thank you for being here. Thank you for believing that broken things and broken people can be rebuilt